to introduce you. And I will actually let you introduce yourself and tell us all about you. Pleasure to have you on board.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Amy SEIDMAN, and I'm with a company called Noble Profit, which is a public benefit corporation, and we have a project called BFLO. And I'm going to talk to you about blockchain and sustainability today. And it's wonderful to be a part of Showbiz Network. Thank you, everybody, who's a part of it. Thank you, Molly Lavick, for having me and including me in the Trailblazer talk. It's a pleasure to come back again and share what we're doing. So, so basically, one of the things that's happening for us all is obviously we're spending a lot of time at home, and we're having a lot of time to think about what we want the world to look like. And when I was thinking about what did I want to do with this talk today, I thought about how it's really important for all of us to really think about what we want the future to look like and to look at what the world is offering us today to work with. And just to ask whoever's got some noise going on, if you could mute yourselves, or perhaps the person who's managing, thanks so much. So when we think about what we want the world to look like as we're in this cocoon, as we're in this place of looking at our resources, our personal resources, many people are really caught up in the moment of what they're experiencing. A lot of fear, a lot of concern. And then there's a whole bunch of people who are actually contemplating the future and how we can use the resources and this reset button to make the world a much different place. And we're seeing a lot of amazing transitions around the sky clearing up. We're seeing animals coming out. And so there's this, I don't know if I should use the word message, but I feel like the earth is kind of signaling us like this feels good. So how can we take that and go a little bit further? So I thought I'd share a bit about what we're doing and to kind of talk about how the world looks today and how we can, transform what we're doing using the resources that we have, or at least my opinion of that. So first of all, the project that we're doing is called BFLO, and it's really about tracking, verifying, and managing proof of reputation for sustainable business. And what does that mean? That means that there's a lot of signals out there, and the world is a complicated place. Oh, sorry, my mouse is going crazy. Forgive me, give me 1 second to orient. Okay, so the world's a big place, and it's very complicated with the way that things are set up. We have this global transition that's happening around money. We have $30 trillion and growing of wealth management that's being committed to climate and what are called ESG, which is environmental social governance, which is a kind of impact target type of number that's compiled with a bunch of information to talk about how a company is doing around the environment, around their social governance, around how they're treating the people who work for them, how they're sourcing their products, and so on. And then we have another massive movement of money that's happening that has to do with the GDP. There's estimated $39 trillion of GDP annually that is moving into investments. So we have this really unique opportunity with this movement. But what we're seeing is a very big blank spot. It's very hard to see where this money is going. And in 2017, we had the United Nations who gave us a climate snapshot of where money was spent, climate expenditures, money being invested in companies that are helping with climate change. And there were lots of big blobs of information, but very little granularity. So how do we figure out where that information is going? And meanwhile, businesses are all differentiating themselves with this positive sustainability footprint. And the reason is because of this massive movement of money is adding more pressure. So they're finally kind of going, okay, we've got to do something. But there's also a lot of factors. There's people who work for them. A lot of millennials don't want to work for the big evil corporation. And many of the people who are in the companies want to make transformation and change. And then you have the customers. So there's a lot of pressure from many different places to move money differently, to do business differently. And so the problem generally has to do with the complexity of business and how things work and trying to meet market demands. And when we start to look at the complexity of information, we have a dizzying mess. And it is most of the ESG metrics that we see, like on Yahoo or Morningstar data or Thomson Reuters, come from what I call a milkshake, a blender of information. And it's missing provenance in many cases. There is some bunch of policies in different areas, depending on what country you're in, to have these mandates of climate and meeting these different targets. And in many cases, there isn't. So when we start to look at the amount of greenwashing that's going in, the amount of information that's self-proclaimed, you start to see a weight of the companies that are doing great things, where there's 25% of the companies in the world are actually really transforming how business is being done. And the ripple effect is amazing. And then you have 75% of which maybe half of them are toying with it and the other half just don't know what to do with it. And part of the problem also has to do with this fragmentation of data. It's a very complicated space. You have different geographies, you have different measurement systems, you have different laws, you have different cultures, and then you have the difference between industries. You have water, you have the environment and timber, chemicals, sourcing, apparel, different things that come together. Like furniture involves multiple different kinds of industries within that one industry. And then you're going to have the environmental footprint of where do they sell the furniture? How is the office space working? How are they treating the people in the office space? So when we hear about ESGs, it's so much more than CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, which usually implies philanthropy. And most people, when they hear sustainability, they hear these tiny little, warm and fuzzy things that are going on, of volunteer projects and so on, and they're not looking at the big picture of what a massive space this is and how we're moving into this space that's very transformational. But the pain points have to do with this fragmentation. There's 600 different eco labels, many different frameworks, a lot of loose scraped information. There's inconsistency. And then to source the data to even benchmark against others, it is extremely expensive and it costs a lot of money for due diligence. You have a lot of investors. We just heard this gentleman talk about how most VCs want you to be having some money coming in because they have to prove the model. And so when we start looking at early stage investments with micro businesses, the sourcing and the due diligence is really painful for investors. So they it tends to be like if you're raising 50 grand, it could cost 50 grand to do the due diligence. So when we see this very complicated mess of information. Then we have the sourcing of that information and the sorting of that information. There's a tremendous burden on the people who are providing that information, and then the dizzying amount of data that is coming out of it when you start looking at IoT. And this is where I see AI playing a role. So as we look and what we're seeking to do, and I can speak from what we're doing, and there's a lot of companies who are approaching these in different ways, but we're approaching this as a meta kind of anchor point. We're using blockchain to enable a truth at the point, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we're looking at how we can use this information to create views across value chains. It's really important to go deep into one particular industry because the complexity, but it's also important to go broad so that corporate leaders, governments, agencies like the World Bank and others can make the kinds of decisions that are relevant for us today. And we're using the Sustainable Development Goals, which is an agreement that basically many countries and corporations through the UN Global Compact, there's probably 14,000 members or more who have all committed to using this framework. And so we're seeing this as a place of harmony amongst these different data points. And we're using that to anchor the information that's being provided, and then to look at how can we triangulate this information across impact, clean tech, and sustainability. In many cases, sustainability is very vertical. It's looking at a couple of things, and then there's different sectors within it. Impact tends to be a little bit different than clean tech. even though sometimes those blend. But impact is generally talking about, many of the millions of people who are sourcing the fiber for your clothes or some of the food that you're eating on your table. And there's a lot of inherent issues with this. And in some ways, clean tech offers a lot of promises, but sometimes there's a lot of environmental imprints that are coming as a result of doing these changes or sourcing the materials. So we're looking to solve that problem across the different silos and the different industries so that we can at least start to get a snapshot. And we can't boil the ocean and do every single thing. There's a lot of other companies that are doing the vertical piece or sorting through information or doing the framework. So we're not creating standards, we're not creating frameworks. There's many people solving that problem who have had 15, 20 years of experience, boots on the ground, working on looking at what the different levers are. What we're doing is creating a system to create a point of truth along the way. So if you're looking on the left and you see the transactions coming from the main company or government or agency, you're going to see that money going out to lots of different places, whether it's vendors or countries, if it's the World Bank, or perhaps an investment firm. And that's going to go out to lots of different projects, which then affect many individuals and have environmental costs. And that information is also going to flow in the other direction, to come from left to right. And it becomes this fractal, this incredible array of information. So when we start to look at this, I'm thinking perhaps I need to just skip over to our main use case. We start to see a need. And one of the use cases that I'm looking at is called mFLO, which is us tracking COVID resources. Right now, the information is coming from many different places. So how can we pull this information together and give a better insight and imprint to that information? And then another one has to do with sourcing. I'll just switch over to the apparel example. So we have Indigenous Clothing, which is a company that does great work, and we map their SDGs to the different artisans who are working with them and the different organic materials. And so what we can see is a harmonizing layer between all the different aspects of the work of this company. And I highly recommend this company because you can feel great wearing those clothes. So I am not sure if I should keep continuing talking. Just checking on my time check.
You are 12 minutes in.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So just making sure that I can kind of look into what some of these other pieces are. So we're starting a lab to model different use cases from different companies. And what we're looking at is how can we create an anchor point. We've also been looking at how we can help file complaints and create a system of information sourcing. So we formed a consortium we're calling FreeFlow. We're at the early stages, and we're working with the Responsible Sourcing Network and others to look at how can we fight child slavery, how can we address some of the disparities that are happening within these different industries and create a signal within the applications or that we're looking to build and the API that we've created. So we've already created an API, which is basically a funnel and an anchor point into the information that we're generating, as well as to be able to use the system to create reports. And another example that I think is really great is the Bay Area Green Tours, which is an organization in the Bay Area that helps create education around food sovereignty. When we start to look at points like education, volunteerism, these fall more in the CSR bucket, but they're really very hard to quantify. So the SDGs provide a wonderful space and framework to help quantify or qualify and create a reporting system for qualitative information that can then translate back to understanding the difference between a company. So in this case, LinkedIn uses their tours and they use it to inform their company and help with team building and food education. And then LinkedIn also has a system where they source the food from some of these local vendors, which then supports local industry, provides healthy food for the people working in the company. And so you see a harmony all around. And we see the opportunity for technology companies, which have nothing to do with food, to be supporting the local food systems and local food space. So what is really fascinating about this and what we're excited about has to do with creating, and this is the last, I think, a really important part of looking at the potential of our future. The world is running on networks and cloud computing. And we are looking at creating a fabric point that will connect the dots between these pieces. And it's really an interesting time because it's never been easier for small business to actually do work. And when we look at each of us today in this COVID reality, we're seeing how much we're relying upon cloud computing and different systems. Well, we're seeing this as well across the board with corporations, big corporations working with vendors. So SAP has probably 80% of the world's business within their systems. And so you also have other entities. And how can we create a layer that can help companies facilitate information between these? So it becomes an opportunity for us to leverage networks that exist and to encourage all of us to be working together with the information that we have. So we're seeing BFLO and what we're creating in the future of that is and our goals are to create a kind of a meta mycelium layer. Mycelium is a network of fungus that is just beneath the surface that connects the trees and the communication of the trees, and it brings nutrients to different parts and gives warning. So if there's a forest fire, this information will travel through the networks, and trees will start to put out tannins, and they'll start to do things. Or if perhaps there's an infestation of bugs, the trees will start to generate a more toxic, bug unfriendly part of their xylem and phloem, or whatever the information and the nutrients that are flowing through the trees, and to protect themselves. So there's this warning system that can occur with this anti-slavery signal, with the anti-trafficking, with supporting safeguard systems for LGBTQ and other disadvantaged or underserved communities that might not be fully represented in different countries or different ecosystems. And then we have the ability, if we're sharing information, to start to network our information together and create comparisons and to essentially gamify the sustainability space. How can we make it fun, easy, and competitive for companies to outcompete themselves, not on an annual basis with their annual sustainability report, but literally on a daily basis or an hourly basis, or even if we could go as far as a weekly basis, that would just be amazing. And we'll start to see each company making their announcements, transforming their value chains, and through that, transforming the lives of all of the people that are working with them, as well as the communities and the environments that their industries touch. And as we see this, we can start to also see the market opportunities. We can see where are companies thriving, where are the disconnect points, where are the needs. And through that, start to compare the financial markets, where our money should be going and where this 30 trillion should be going. So I think that is a wonderful way to look at the future of how we can network this together and actually create the future that we want.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Sorry, what's that?
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I actually have a very interesting question here for you.
Oh, okay.
Someone asks, transparency, why is it important and is it required?
So that's a good question, because in some cases, transparency is concerning. So we have a lot of big companies who want to have things kept under wraps, and it makes sense because they have trade secrets. But when we start to look at the flow of let's look at the apparel industry and where you might be sourcing your materials. If you're a fabric company, 60% of all yarn has child slavery in it. So if you don't have transparency, if we all look around, we have been paying a tremendous cost as a human race for the clothing that we're getting so cheaply. I don't really want to have any clothing that has child slavery in it or any kind of slavery. The same is happening with fish. There are people, millions of people on boats floating around in the South Asia seas that are getting the fish on your table, that have not seen land for 3 years and haven't had a life. They're not getting paid, and some of them are dying. And similarly, we have cobalt in the phones that we're talking on that is sourced with slavery. So transparency is really important. Then you have the environmental footprint. You have pollution. You have, what are companies doing? How are they actually starting to change their footprint within their corporation? And in many ways, it actually is really good business. It's not just signal from the marketplace or eliminating the destruction of human lives, but it's actually pays for itself. So we want to create systems that we can see this, also protect the lives of people and the well-beings of companies' trade secrets. So it's a balance. It's going to be part transparency and part public information.
Thank you so much. I know, because I'm in Norway right now, and I know that the UN Global Impact is huge here and is being implemented into most businesses. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that works in the US, or does it even touch the US?
Well, so the United States is a unique animal. When we look at our administration, they have removed us from the Paris Agreement as well as some of these commitments. But private industry and the commitments of cities are very strong. We have many cities who are committed to zero carbon output, and corporations that have been just stepping up and saying, we want to do things right. Because they're recognizing it. So despite the political orientation, we're seeing a lot of leadership that's coming from private industry as well as the local governments.
Thank you. And I think the last question before we finish off, what do you see for the near future? What do you see post-pandemic, if there is such a thing?
Well, I think there will be such a thing. And so what I see in the very near future is a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion and fear. And I see disorientation in the markets, and I unfortunately see potentially some negative outcomes that I think are going to put a lot of pressure. Right now, we're seeing a tremendous amount of pressure on small individuals who are working, all around the world, that are being affected. And when I say small individual, I mean tiny people. I mean small earners, workers who are gig workers or sourcing producers. Folks like that. So it's hitting everybody hard. But I think what's happening is we are in this unique opportunity in this space. And so we have many people around the world who are saying, like New Zealand, the Prime Minister of New Zealand said, hey, we want to have a green economy when we come out of this. So I think we're going to see a lot of transformation, and I'm hoping that the United States is going to follow with that.
Thank you so much, Amy. Last but not least, what can we do for you? What do you need to reach out to people? Because really more people need to know about this.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. And just to preface on the last, I don't mean to be a naysayer of gloom and doom, because I think that we have a lot of amazing opportunity in the future. And so what I had put together is a lab, and we would love to have some companies who want to jump on board and do some early modeling with us. So join our lab. You can go to bflo.io/contact and work with us. Let us model your use case, participate with us, and let's create this together. Join our consortium called FreeFlow if you're interested in anti-slavery. And if you want your SDGs modeled, let's do that. So thank you so much.
Amy, I want to thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And I want to give a shout out to BFLO, because I believe Amy is one of the most prolific entrepreneurs of our era. And it's a real treat that she was able to join us today. And I believe so strongly in the cause behind what Amy is advocating here. And she brings it all together with the blockchain aspects